Cenote Temple of Doom Tragedy, August 17, 1997, Mexico. That afternoon, 28-year-old Eduardo Mendez, an open-water diving instructor, prepared to lead a group of 5 tourists here. The group included 3 Americans and 2 Canadians, Rebecca and Mark Williams, Thomas and Lisa Chen, and Joy Johnson. In the middle of the Yucatan jungle lies a deceptively small opening in the ground, a dark hole about 10 feet across. Locals call it Cenote Temple of Doom. They weren't experienced cave divers. Their equipment was basic: single air tanks, minimal lights, and no specialized cave gear. And yet, Eduardo's briefing focused more on the beauty of the site than the dangers waiting below. Joy stayed above as she was tired from traveling. One by one, they climbed down a wooden ladder, 16 feet into the cenote's dark water. Sunlight barely touched the surface. It was quiet, enclosed, almost like stepping into another world. They descended through a thin halocline, a shimmering layer where fresh water meets salt water, and entered a wide cavern filled with pale light filtering through the entrance above. For 20 minutes, they swam in this cavern zone, surrounded by limestone walls and eerie silence. Then, Eduardo made a decision that would change everything. Instead of staying in the safe cavern zone, he led the group deeper, toward a passage ominously known as the Madonna Passage. 2 warning signs stood at the boundary. The first, a diver symbol with a red slash through it. The second, even clearer: stop. Prevent your death. Go no further. Eduardo ignored them, and the group, trusting their guide, followed. The passage narrowed to about 5 feet wide, 6.5 feet high. As they moved forward, the light vanished behind them. After 10 minutes, they were nearly 400 feet from the entrance. Their single tanks were running low, pressure dropping fast from depth, effort, and anxiety. Thomas Chen was the first to signal a problem. Eduardo finally realized the danger and motioned to turn back. But in the narrow tunnel, trying to reverse with 5 divers caused panic. Their fins struck the floor, stirring up clouds of silt. Within seconds, visibility dropped to 0. Eduardo pushed ahead toward the exit, assuming the others were behind him, but they weren't. Rebecca and Mark Williams became separated in the darkness. Thomas and Lisa Chen clung to each other, moving in the wrong direction. When Eduardo reached the main cavern, he realized he was alone, his tank nearly empty. He surfaced and shouted to Joy for help. Then he grabbed Joy's full tank, switched gear, and went straight back down. About 300 feet in, he found Lisa Chen, barely conscious. Thomas's gauge read near empty. Eduardo shared his air and guided them out, pushing them toward the cavern zone and up to the surface. He sent them up, then immediately dove again, to look for the Williams couple. 50 feet into the passage, he found Rebecca Williams unconscious, her tank empty. He grabbed her and brought her to the surface. He dove again, desperate to find Mark. He found him deeper inside, floating motionless. Mark's tank was empty. Eduardo tried CPR at the surface, but it was too late. Rescue teams arrived within minutes. Rebecca was taken to the hospital, but despite medical care, she was pronounced dead that evening. The official cause: drowning and hypoxia. Sterkfontein Cave Disaster, September 29, 1984. Deep in South Africa's Gauteng province lies a cave system called Sterkfontein. That morning, 33-year-old cave diver Peter Verhulzel joined his 2 close friends, Nuno Gomez and Malcolm Johnson, to explore an unmapped section of the cave. Their goal was to extend an underwater guideline from the entrance to a flooded chamber called Milner Hall, a place that few had ever seen, where the ceilings disappear into darkness and the air is thick with minerals and humidity. Nuno went first, threading the safety line carefully through the submerged tunnels. He covered almost 400 feet underwater, placing the final tie-off deep inside Milner Hall. When he surfaced, the group celebrated. They'd just connected a new section of cave to the known system, but instead of calling it a day, they decided to dive once more. This time, all 3 together, following the newly laid line. The first dive went smoothly, the second would not. Inside the cave, visibility was poor. Dust like silt hovered in the water, clinging to every fin kick. Halfway through the route, Peter spotted a side tunnel, a black slit in the wall, half hidden behind limestone. Curious, he swam toward it. Nuno signaled for him to return, but Peter had already slipped inside. Moments later, he was gone. Nuno and Malcolm waited, then assumed Peter had taken another exit, one of the air pockets near the surface. They returned to the entrance, but Peter wasn't there. Panic set in. They refilled their tanks and went back immediately, searching every turn, every crevice, their lights piercing through a fog of suspended rock dust. They had no choice but to resurface and call for help. By evening, local police divers and firefighters had arrived, but they were not trained for complex cave rescues. Visibility was now almost zero, and the entrance was too narrow for more than one diver at a time. The search was called off until morning. What no one knew was that Peter was still alive. He had lost the main guideline and wandered deeper into the labyrinth. In total darkness, he found a tiny air pocket. He waited there, tapping on the rocks, hoping someone would hear. When no one came, he switched off his light to save the last of his battery. Days passed. He began drinking the stagnant cave water to survive. Waiting outside, rescue teams returned repeatedly, but each time the silt was so thick it blinded them after a few feet. The cave was closed to the public. Weeks went by. Hope faded. Peter tried to find a way through the dry sections of the cave, but met a dead end. Nearly 6 weeks later, volunteers and divers, led again by Nuno, discovered a dry connection between the upper and lower passages. Inside, near a small rock ledge, they found footprints, and moments later, Peter's body. Beside him was a small message etched into the limestone wall. "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." He had survived for nearly 3 weeks underground, alone in darkness, before starvation and exhaustion finally took him. Gollum's Cave, August 18th, 2005. 5 friends stood at the mouth of a cave known as Gollum's Cave. Some locals called it the Cave of Death. At around 3 in the morning, they reached the entrance. One friend decided to stay outside and wait. The cave was narrow and wet, echoing with the steady sound of dripping water. Their first obstacle came almost immediately, a shallow pool they had to crawl through just to move forward. Once they made it across, they reached a fork in the passage. Left or right? They chose left. That choice led them to another pool of water. It looked harmless at first, but beneath the surface was a hidden tunnel, an underwater passage only 3 to 4 feet wide, forcing anyone who entered to be completely submerged. The tunnel stretched about 15 feet, pitch black and claustrophobic. One by one, they dove in. Each person held their breath, swam through the narrow tube, and emerged into another chamber. Inside, there was barely 3 feet of airspace above the water, just enough to keep their heads above the surface. At first, everything seemed fine, but within minutes, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, stale, suffocating. They didn't know it yet, but the air in that chamber was toxic. Cavers call it bad air, when carbon dioxide builds up and oxygen drops dangerously low. In that environment, your body stops working the way it should. You can't think clearly. You can't move properly. You can't breathe. Meanwhile, the friend outside began to worry. There was no sound, no light, no sign of movement from inside the cave. He shouted their names. Nothing. After several minutes, panic set in. He stepped into the cave himself, but all he found was darkness and silence. He quickly called a few experienced cavers for help, and then the police. But time was already running out. Inside the cave, the group must have realized what was happening. They tried to go back the way they came, through the same underwater tunnel. One of them went first, diving into the water, searching for the hole that led back to safety. But the bad air had already taken its toll. Her mind was foggy, her body weak. She couldn't find the exit. She ran out of breath. The second person went after her. He found her, but he too became disoriented and trapped. Then another followed, and another, until all 4 of them were lost in that same narrow tunnel. When rescuers arrived, it was too late. Days later, the bodies of all 4 friends were recovered, and Gollum's Cave, the Cave of Death, was permanently sealed with cement. You can suggest some incidents in the comments, and I will make the next video on it. Thank you.